everybody, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I'm Bob Goodwin, the founder of Career Club. We are really excited for today's episode. Our guest is Nik Modi, and I'll do a more proper introduction here in just a moment. But first of all, I want to thank all of you who are dialed in. If you're live, please let us know where you're coming in from. And if you can't watch the whole episode, you're welcome to see this on replay. Just click on the event and you'll be able to see it at your pleasure. But if you are with us live, we would love for you to comment, ask questions, make this interactive. That always makes it the best. Our topic today is, so you want to be in the C-suite. So obviously we all have career aspirations and want to take our career as far as we can. For some folks, that's in a really large company. For other people, that might be in a medium-sized company, or maybe you're even a solopreneur running your own company. But there are qualities of executive leadership that hold true across organizations despite or irrespective of their scale. So our guest today, who has just an amazing perspective to offer, is Nik Modi. And I'm actually going to go ahead and read some of Nik's introduction here because it's pretty impressive. So Nik is the managing director at RBC Capital Markets, where he's responsible for coverage of beverage, household personal care, packaged food, and tobacco. The companies under Nik's coverage total over $1 trillion in combined market value. We'll look at some of those companies in a minute. Nik has consistently been ranked as one of the top analysts across the consumer space by Institutional Investors All-Star Analyst Survey, which is really the Oscars of the sell side on Wall Street. He's also been top rated across various analyst polls, including the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, and Forbes. And beyond that, Nik is just an all-around great guy. We've been friends for probably 15 years. And Nik, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's LinkedIn Live.
Thank you, Bob. It's so good to be with you. Thanks for asking me to do this.
No, well, I'm really excited. As I said in the introduction, you've got a unique perspective on leadership. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to kind of describe your role for people who may not be familiar with what a sell-side analyst does. But that said, you've got 20 plus years of experience, interfacing directly with CEOs and CFOs of some of the best known companies in the world, like Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, Campbell's, Heinz, some really impressive company names. So as we get into that, and just to help people kind of get to know you a little bit, a little tradition that we've got here on our LinkedIn Live is asking you what we call Rock's Fab Five, just a little bit of an icebreaker. And so to kind of get that started, Nik, where were you born and raised? Technical difficulties.
Little technical, just give me. Yeah, we had a little technical difficulty. So
no worries, we're flexible.
As we often get in this time and day and age, right?
Yeah.
So Bob, where was I born and raised? I was born, my parents immigrated from India. You just give me a second. Can you hear me okay, Bob?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So my parents immigrated from India in the late 60s, and I was born in the mid 70s in Princeton, New Jersey. And basically spent my entire life in that area, Princeton, Hillsborough. I went to Rutgers University. I actually started off at Rutgers, Newark, because Rutgers, New Brunswick wouldn't accept me based on my grades. So that's a little fun fact about me. And then I ended up graduating from Rutgers College in 1998.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I crammed 4 years into 7 at Tennessee. So we all have our story, which actually kind of takes the second question, which was around education and school. So that's cool. A little bit about your family.
Yeah. So I've been married for 18 years. I met my wife on a blind date in London.
Wow.
Hang on one second. Sorry. I tell you, these the day of technology is upon us here. So I met my wife on a blind date 18 years ago in London. I was working at UBS at the time and was doing some global beverage work. And we got set up through a friend. And 6 months later, she moved to the US and we got married. And so I've been happily married for 18 years. I have 2 boys, 14, Sean, and 12, Shiv. And it's just a great time right now with the family. Really enjoying myself.
Awesome. Well, we were talking a little bit in the green room or whatever before we got on the phone, and your kids are pretty accomplished too, right? You've got a basketball player and a soccer player.
My older one is a pretty good soccer player, and I think there's some aspirations for trying to play in college and maybe even semi-pro. So we'll see what happens with that. But he's very committed. Wakes up 5:30 every morning and works out, and so it's fun to see that kind of discipline.
No, that's awesome. And then you mentioned UBS, not UPS for anybody, but just a little bit about your career overview, and maybe if you could spend just a second, helping folks kind of get grounded in what you do as an analyst.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let me explain what I do first. I mean, I'm a sell-side analyst, so typically you would see someone on CNBC or CNN or whatever talking about a certain sector or the stock market. That's my job. Okay. I publish research. My research is primarily consumed by institutional investors, so professional money managers at hedge funds and big mutual funds like a Fidelity, for instance. And basically, my job is to help these portfolio managers that look at all the stocks across every sector, help them really understand which stocks within consumer staples are the best. So that fundamentally is my job. Now, in order to do that job, I spend a lot of time with executive teams, per why we're doing this discussion today. CEOs primarily, CFOs, even some of the divisional level executives. I spend a lot of time with boards of directors. And in order to do my job effectively, I try to really understand what's happening in the industry. So not only do I interact with the C-suites, but I spend a lot of time with key retailers, distributors, agency companies, all along the supply chain, because it's my job to know what's happening, in all aspects of their businesses. Now, a little bit on my background, I started covering or becoming a sell-side analyst right out of Rutgers. So I graduated, I got hired as a junior analyst, and I covered, prior to consumer goods, I covered 6 different industries.
Wow.
For-profit education, semiconductors, wireless telecom, Latin American telecom, and ended up working with a wonderful woman named Caroline Levy in the beverage industry back in the early 2000s, and had just an incredible time with her. She was a great mentor to me. And when I took over as a senior analyst, I just kept on taking on more and more responsibility, which is why I cover basically all of consumer goods now.
Yep. And Carolyn's legacy is pretty legendary. She's got quite a litter of all-star analysts that she helped develop over the years. That's super helpful. And just one other place I know that people would see your name in part of your role is for those of you who listen to analyst calls. So, Procter & Gamble's doing their quarterly earnings call, and there's a handful of analysts who are on that call asking questions, or if you read the transcripts of those calls, that's another place that you would see Nik and other sell-siders. So super helpful explanation. So thank you. And we'll kind of unpack a little bit of that in a minute. And then lastly is, you're a human being. You've got a life outside of work. What do you like to do? What are you interested in?
Yeah, I always like to kid around. I'm a full-time dad and a part-time analyst. So, I just like training and mentorship, but I love being a dad, and I spend a lot of time with my kids. I'm an avid basketball fan and player, as are my kids. Not so good at soccer. That's more my wife, which is why my son has all the athleticism. He gets it from her. But really, Bob, I love to be with my family. We travel quite a bit, at least we did before COVID. So we've seen a lot of the world, and spent a lot of time with the boys and just a lot of sports.
No, that's awesome. No, I know that you're super committed to your family, and I think that's part of what makes you a well-rounded person. So real quick, just sort of looking at some of the comments, and thank you everybody for chiming in on where you're calling in from. We've got Oslo, Norway. I think I'm gonna know who that might be. We've got Canada, and I think we've covered pretty much every time zone in the US. So again, huge thanks to everybody for joining. And as we go through this, we may not be able to get to every question, but if you've got a question, and Heather, who I should acknowledge is sort of the brains behind this whole operation, is helping coordinate some of your comments. So we'll try and catch as many as we can. But we've got a little bit of discussion guide to kind of get started. And again, the topic is, so you want to be in the C-suite. And, the premise here is, Nik, you've got these decades of experience, interacting with, as you said, boards of directors and CXOs of major companies. And so what I thought we could do is start to kind of, break that apart a little bit in some of the attributes, that you see, and I said in our notes, maybe a little bit of the good, bad, and the ugly. We probably won't name names unless it's highly complimentary, but one of the first areas, and I was sort of bragging on my Tennessee education there for a minute, but to what extent is like the CEO, the CFO, they tend to be the smartest person in the room. They're the person with an outsized intellect. Is that something that you see as intelligence? Is it always the smartest person in the room?
No, I mean, it's interesting, Bob. If you actually look at the statistics, 89% of the current Fortune 500 CEOs are not from an Ivy League institution.
What was the number?
89%.
So nearly 90%
are
come
not
from
non-Ivy League.
So okay, so you just answered one of my questions. So if I didn't go to Harvard, I still have a chance?
Absolutely. In fact, 54% of the current CEOs in the Fortune 500 are actually from state universities. Okay, so to address your question, what I find is that it's not necessarily the smartest guy in the room, okay, or gal in the room, but it's the person that can understand what is happening in the room and knowing how to delegate and knowing who they can resource information from. And I think that's what I've really seen in my 20 years of spending a lot of time with a lot of CEOs, is that they don't necessarily have to be the smartest, but they do have to be the one that can work well with others the best to get the best out of all of the people around them. And if you think about it, like that's kind of how the president of the United States operates, right? You have one person, then you have a bunch of people around them. And it's really those people that are helping drive policy and decision making. And that's the same thing that happens in corporations. The CEO is there to manage, but a lot of the decisions are also being made from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen that change over time? I mean, you've got like a Jack Welch kind of a leader from 20, 30 years ago, very strong hand kind of leadership. Has that changed over time to where this more consensus, more delegation, or has this been consistent with the great leaders over time?
No, look, I think leadership styles need to adjust to the working population and the environment. And I would argue that we haven't seen enough evolution out of leadership for the changes that have occurred, especially the last 2 years, right? When I really think about, the right type of leaders that I've interacted with, there are a few kind of really interesting commonalities, right? One is their ability to align, okay? Their ability to stay consistent on message, right? Their ability to delegate, but also their ability to think longer term. What I think is happening too often right now, and quite frankly, it's the entire ecosystem. It's not just analysts. It's the media. It's suppliers. It's investors. It's one's own view on their personal wealth. What I find that is happening is that executives today are becoming much more near term in their orientation, right? It's almost like they're trying to get reelected and they just want to keep their job in this world of activism. Yeah. And we're not seeing the kind of investment or long-term thinking that I think is required in an environment where disruption is so normal, right? And that's why you're seeing so much disruption in the marketplace. It's because these big corporations are being run like a government versus really being consumer-centric, right? So we hear about consumer centricity. Well, the reality is companies have gotten away from being consumer-centric. They've become stakeholder-centric, right? And I think that is really an opportunity for a lot of young leaders to really rethink and reshape how they manage their enterprises.
Yeah, I did a post on LinkedIn yesterday, I think, and point some insights from good to great in level 5 leadership. And you've touched on a couple of them here. One is leaders that would be looking for what's going to make the most impact in the next quarter of a century, not the next quarter, right?
Correct.
And again, the humility to be able to delegate, and I don't need to be this. In fact, I probably actually suffer a little bit from some anxiety about not being the smartest person in the room. Like, how did I get here? Poser, syndrome, imposter syndrome. But you said something I want to dial into a little bit more, which is being more aligned with sort of the zeitgeist of the workforce, right, and the culture. and again, I don't want to put you in an awkward position, and it could maybe be somebody outside of your coverage, but are there companies that you see that are doing that maybe better than others?
Yeah, look, I will say, like an Estee Lauder, I think has done a really good job of really being in tune to their workforce. Okay. P&G is another example where they've become increasingly in tune to their workforce while also becoming more consumer centric. Coca-Cola made a lot of adjustments several years ago when James Quincy came in to run the company. So yeah, I think there are a lot of great examples of companies that have been able to do this. Now, look, do I think it's optimal? No. Do I think that human resource departments in general need to become more innovative and become more meaningful and influencing the strategy of the company? Because now the workforce, this is not, we can't take it for granted anymore, right? Finding the right workers, finding the qualified workers is not what it used to be. And it's really important for organizations to readjust around that.
Yeah. So speaking, I just want to go back to Estee Lauder or James at Coke or whomever. If you double clicked on some of the things that they're doing maybe differently than other companies, what would you point to?
Oh, which company was that, Bob? Sorry.
Like Estee Lauder or Coke.
Well, I think they were in tune to a lot of their social factors that drive, let's call it ESG, diversity, inclusion, women, right? I mean, and obviously their categories are, help them with that given the female exposure and the skew. But that would be one example. Another example would be P&G in terms of how they reorganized, how they made decisions within the company to let people that really understand the businesses really drive the P&Ls and then in the resourcing.
Yeah.
Right. These are the types of changes that are important for culture, but just as important for actual business fundamentals and performance.
Yeah. Len Guerin, a friend of ours from Los Angeles, has a good line here. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
That's right. I mean, and just to get back to that smartest person in the room thing, I think you have to be the most aware person in the room.
Ooh,
right? That to me is really the key intangible that I don't see enough of within the corporate C-suites is what is going on around me, right? Mm-hmm. Am I aware of what everyone is thinking? Because then my messaging can be much more in tune to my audience. For instance, I asked you today, earlier before we did this.
Yes.
Hey, what do you think your audience struggles with the most, right? And we came up with this whole notion of like, hey, is education and a certain pedigree, the right to become a CEO, and that's why I did the research, because I understand that that's what the audience cares about, right?
Yes.
And I think this is the key: is that it's not the smartest person; it's the most aware person.
Yeah. Well, so let's kind of then maybe sort of bridge into like basically I feel like what we're talking about is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that ability to feel the room, feel their customer base, right? I mean, who was that? What was it? Better.com? Is that the guy that laid off everybody on Zoom?
Right.
Right. Yeah. And just like zero emotional intelligence. And he's just getting filleted, and rightfully so, in the press. And
filleted and fired, by the way.
Yeah. And again, rightfully so. And so, and then maybe you brought up diversity too, which I think is really an important topic, because, as we get different voices in the room, different perspectives, it's like, oh, I didn't know maybe that like that segment would feel that way. That's really an interesting perspective. I want to learn. So I guess there's sort of a natural curiosity, an openness to listen. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely. I have a different view on diversity and inclusion, by the way. Being someone of diverse background, I don't look at it by race or ethnicity. I look at it as within the organization, right? So if you think about it, a lot of these consumer companies or companies in general, they started off addressing a consumer need, right? Mm. And as time went on, the decision making got further and further away from the consumer and more centralized within the organization with a small number of executives. What I think needs to happen, and I think there's a big opportunity for leaders to lead in this area, is becoming inclusive of the people on the front lines. They're the ones that know what's going on in the business. They're the ones that understand what's happening in the supply chain, what's happening with consumer trends, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't they a bigger part of the decision-making matrix? And I don't see that across a lot of the big CPG companies that I deal with, right? So that's on kind of the diversity and inclusion. It's really the inclusion of perspective and the diversity of perspective. Okay?
Yes.
So that's number one. On the emotional intelligence point, I think this is something that hopefully the audience is really keying in on, right? If you're aware, if you understand how to interact with others, if you understand how to delegate, and this is why you see a lot of state university people as CEOs, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't the highest grade earners in high school, et cetera, right? But they learned over time how they can leverage other people to propel them into the next level, right? So if you're used to doing everything yourself and you're always like the best at everything, you won't necessarily understand how to leverage others. And that, as a leader, is the entire job. How do you leverage your employee base to accomplish a certain task or goal, right?
Yes.
And so, I just think, I don't want to say intelligence is overrated, but it's a type of intelligence that's underrated, which is emotional intelligence.
Yeah, no, I love it. And kind of maybe tying a couple of themes here together. You talked about, and people are reacting really well to your thing about be the most aware person in the room. And earlier you said that, one of the things that's going on is that there's so much change going on, right? Just such a dynamic, environment that we're in, and technology is not going to let go of that. So it's just going to continue to be that way. That awareness, that alertness to like, oh, something is changing. Like, are we going to be on the wrong end of this, or can we capitalize on it? Is there anybody that you're seeing, again, only naming companies if it is okay, but like where companies are taking advantage of this dynamic situation that's happening and leveraging it for innovation in either product or communication or some other form?
Yeah, Bob, I can't really think off the top of my head of a company that, obviously a lot of companies have benefited from COVID because of just general consumption of categories, right?
Yeah.
But let me just give you my own personal testimony, okay? In order to do my job, and I think this is relevant for anyone listening, for any meeting that you're going to have with someone that's higher than your level that you're aspiring to get to, right? Which is the whole point of this discussion, is what do they know, right? Like when I write a research report, I always ask myself, what does my audience already know? Because if I'm just writing what they know, then I'm not creating value and I'm not elevating myself. So I need to understand what they know, so then I can ask them, or I can tell them what they don't know.
Yeah.
So if you're going into a planning meeting, or you're going to go meet with the CEO of your organization, or present to the board, do a little bit of work ahead of time, like I did with you on this talk.
Yes.
What do they know already? What do they want to know? And then provide the most relevant answer. And I think this is a simple tactic that is not used at all, right? You just kind of go in and you tell people what you know and what you want to tell them, not what they need to know.
Yeah, well, that's a fabulous point. And Steve Thornberry, is asking, I think, kind of a related question, which is, if there's so much short-termism going on, and we're presenting or trying to persuade the CEO to do something, should I take that short-term mentality and just kind of accept it for what it is?
Listen, this is where communication becomes so critical. There's always ways to bridge the short and long term. So let me explain. And this is simple math. If you look at the valuation of a consumer staples company, okay, and I don't want to get into the financial mumbo jumbo of discounted cash flow and all this kind of stuff, but over 50% of any stock's value is tied up in what they call the terminal value, which is the amount of cash that you estimate will happen after year 10. So let's call it 2031 and beyond, okay? That terminal value, people ignore it, but that's over half the value of your company. That is not near-term stuff. In fact, bad near-term choices can negatively affect your terminal value, which is why stock prices go down. So think about this. Like some of you may be like, well, hey, I'm at company XYZ. We just beat earnings and our stock went down 3% or 4%. And then I would have to say, yeah, but John Doe, did you realize that they cut marketing in order to beat earnings, and the investor community can see right through it? And so that's invariably hurting the long term. So the two cannot be talked in some separate silos. They're very interrelated.
Yeah.
And I get it. I understand the short-termism and how many people listening today who are closer to the market say, man, we got to really spend a lot of money on XYZ initiative to be prepared for the future, because you get it. And they might not in the C-suite understand, but it's your job. That's your job, right? This is how you lead. This is how you become a leader, right?
Yep. Well, and I appreciate what you're saying about like bridging the short term and the long term. They're actually, they have to be related and integrated, right? And it also kind of gets to your point about tell them what they need to know. So like, if you think that short-termism is, the flavor of the day, and you just go and pitch a short-term idea, hey, let's just whack this budget or do something super, super tactical that actually hurts the brand or hurts the company. Like you need to tell the CEO, we can do that, sir, ma'am, but, please understand this is the math of what's going to happen, right? And I think that's what people really want.
Exactly. It's the ability to communicate like, hey, if we forego this investment, 2 quarters from now, it's going to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is my single biggest issue. And some would say, well, how can he say that? He's an analyst. Yeah, but I'm not an analyst that ever says, don't make the right investment choice. I'm the one that says, hey, they made this investment. That's why I actually want to buy the stock. They missed earnings, they guided down, and the stock went down. But I think this is absolutely the right decision for the company longer term. We're upgrading the stock or whatever, right? We're recommending the stock. I make those calls all the time. I can't tell you, and everyone listening knows, right? If you've been in the industry 5 years or 20 years, how many times have you seen companies blow up, right? Just massive earnings rebases because they didn't make the right short-term choices.
Yeah. So shifting topics, because we're on LinkedIn and, sort of the nature of LinkedIn is careers and jobs and stuff like that. What are you seeing with the whole, kind of war for talent, that there's, so many people, the great resignation, there's like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to go back to your office. That job that I've had, it just doesn't fit my life anymore. You talked about first that you're a full-time dad and a part-time analyst. I think a lot of people are reframing their lives that before the pandemic, the frame was work. And where did my life fit into that frame? And now people are saying, flipping it, like, nope, the frame is my life. Where does work fit into it? But what are you seeing, companies do well or maybe not well to retain talent and recruit talent?
Yeah, Bob, this is an area where I feel like there's a lot of dislocation, a lot of upside for those that get it right. But this is not some quick fix. We're talking about complete cultural overhauls of companies, complete rethinking of HR processes, like really tactical, operational type of stuff. Okay. First of all, you need to be aware, right? Be the most aware HR department across the entire industry. What do your people want, right? Do they want more pay? No, I actually don't think it's all about the pay. Like we tend to talk about pricing and elasticities and wages, but we all know there's a value equation, right?
Yes.
It's pay, it's lifestyle, it's quality of work, it's satisfaction with work, it's who your direct report is, right? So I would argue many managers are actually not professional managers. They're professionals that are managing.
Yeah.
To be a good manager requires a very, very unique set of skills. Not everyone is going to be good at it. So if you're an engineer and is making your way up through an organization in R&D or manufacturing, and all of a sudden now you have 100 people reporting to you, just because you're really good at your job doesn't mean you know how to manage people.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be a complete rethink of this whole process for companies to actually become more effective at recruiting. And by the way, for the consumer goods industry, it's going to get harder and harder because there's more gig opportunity, right? When you talk about the gig economy, there's more startup opportunity, right? There's a lot of opportunity in Silicon Valley for really good employees, sharp, smart.
Yes.
And so the war on talent is only going to get tougher.
Yeah, and in talking about, kind of Silicon Valley and where like a lot of VC money and private equity money is going, it is in CPG, right? It's in beauty, it's in health, it's in food, it's in combinations of those things, right? So part of that value equation that the employee is getting is, do I believe in the purpose of this company? Like, does this inspire me? Or
Correct.
are we just sort of cranking out more of whatever, to your earlier point, just to drive, shareholder wealth? And I'm sort of left holding the bag here while, a very small group of people are making a slew of money.
That's right. And you got to inspire your people, right?
Yeah.
They got to really believe what they're doing. And I'm not sure that companies have done a great job at fostering that kind of emotion.
Yeah. So can one of the other topics that I was really hoping to hear you kind of talk about, and this is sort of back on, the qualities of a great executive, is the difference between strategy and execution.
Yeah.
So I'll just let you riff on that for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. They say execution is strategy for lunch, right? I mean, I've seen companies over my 20 years that have had brand portfolios that pale in comparison to the big companies, yet their execution was so on point. They created the value, whereas the larger companies with the best brands did not. Okay. And so execution is critical. Now the question becomes, how do you get it to be so good, right? And I want to go to Church and Dwight as a great example of this, because when Jim Craigie came in to become CEO of that company back in the early 2000s, Church and Dwight was kind of a joke prior to that. And his ability to align, and this is the hallmark of a great leader, okay? His ability to align the organization around a common set of goals and to consistently articulate those goals was the magic. That's how the entire organization aligned itself. Fabrizio Frida, when he got to Estee Lauder to be CEO, same thing. The alignment, the consistency of what he was trying, the simplicity of the strategy and what they were trying to accomplish. So I think when it comes to execution, it is far the most important initiative that you can pursue. But the way you get there is really about alignment and consistency.
So I'm hearing alignment, communication, consistency, and simplicity. It kind of gets, that reminds me a little bit of back to being smart. And sometimes the more flowery it sounds, right? And we see this with technology companies all the time, right? They use all these kind of convoluted or new made up words to make it sound more important or more innovative than maybe it really is, right? To raise money or whatever. But you're right. I mean, and it also ties to your earlier point about, do you really understand the frontline worker? You need to be able to speak in his or her language in a way that I understand what we're doing. I understand why we're doing it. I understand where I fit into, that initiative or these objectives, right? But if it all just sort of lives in, the big conference room on the top floor and doesn't ever make its way down.
Absolutely. Let me give you just one, and I'll make it generic so I won't call out the company. But I remember there was a very large company struggling for a while with strategy, with creating value, with growth. Okay. And, the company went through a couple CEOs and couldn't fix the problem. And I remember being with a group of this company's employee base, okay, from very low to kind of mid-level to some senior executives. And I asked them during my presentation, I want everyone on a piece of paper to write down 3 ways that if you're CEO, 3 things you would do to fix the company, to get on a better path. Okay. And I remember collecting 50, 60 different responses from people, right? And putting together. And it was very common what the feedback was, but from different perspectives, from R&D, from manufacturing, for all sales, from marketing. And fast forward 3 to 4 years later, and this company, basically, that's how they turned themselves around. It was the same thing. So when I say, speak language of your front line employees, it's not just so you can communicate to them. It's so you can actually learn from them and absorb what they know, because oftentimes they actually have a better handle on what's happening than the people in the ivory tower.
Yeah. And so, it's really interesting talking about consistency. I'm hearing a lot of consistency in what you're sharing today, right? Because, that alignment, the simplicity, the awareness of what, the culture of your company, the people at various levels of your company, the ability to tell leaders what they need to hear. That's what you basically did with that little kind of, you know, analog exercise of just collecting pieces of paper and like, here it is, like, here's your strategy. How do you see, when companies have this together, it impacting their culture?
How I'm sorry, Bob, can you just ask that again?
When they're aligned on message, like they're aligned on the goals, they know what they're doing and why they're doing it. How does that ultimately impact culture?
Oh, I mean, it's huge, right? Because when everyone has clarity on what they're doing, and it's very clear to understand, hey, I did X and now I'm getting rewarded for X,
yes,
versus the goalpost moving. Oh no, we're focused on revenue. No, we're focused on margin. Oh no, we have to focus on this, right? Yep. When you have a simple, consistent, aligned strategy, then everyone knows where they fit. It's almost like, they say like when a new baby is born, it's so chaotic, and that's the whole point of a schedule, to keep, so they know what's coming next, yeah. And they're happier that a happy baby is a scheduled baby, right? Yeah. We're all babies in our own little ways, right? In the world, right? We need to have some sense of security and clarity and visibility, and that's what a simple, consistent strategy can deliver.
Yeah. One topic that I wanted to kind of pick up on a little bit is, and I think that this would be okay if you got specific examples, if you can think of something off the top of your head, but when you've seen leaders kind of have the courage of their convictions to make a decision that maybe even the street kind of threw up on a little bit, it didn't actually help meet the quarterly objective, but really was that right decision. Can you think of a time or two where you've seen, leaders have that courage to make a hard decision and watch it play out?
Yeah. One thing just popped in my head. I remember when James Quincy took over as the CEO of Coke. Mm-hmm. And on his first day of being CEO, he had a town hall, and he said to the organization, Coca-Cola does not need to be your favorite drink anymore. Right? Wow. I mean, think about the tone that sets, right? And then ultimately, fast forward 2 to 3 years later, and Coke, we all appreciate Coke to be a very holistic beverage company. In fact, their moniker is beverages for life. Yeah. But just the amount of thought that probably went into that one line sentence, that's good leadership, right? Being able to play the chessboard and saying, look, I'm going to say this. You as a CEO or a CFO or a chief marketing officer, even as an analyst, you have to realize your words matter. You might say one sentence and it's a throwaway. If you didn't think about the implications of that, it could have a wide-ranging kind of negative feedback and negative loop, right? So that just stuck out at me because that was such a huge thing culturally that set the tone for their strategy, which ultimately has manifested in much better top-line growth.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about this in a different category, but sort of the same idea of like, if all we ever consume are our brands, we don't have awareness of what else is out there. It's like, oh my gosh, that's actually very tasty. That's actually performs really well, whatever the brand claims are. But if you're just like so myopic and so insular that we're not even allowed to acknowledge, except we hate those guys, it doesn't have to be your favorite beverage. That's okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's a great example, and James has done a lot of really interesting stuff, at Coke to kind of, think about that. That's such a huge ship. It's got, 100+ years of legacy, and like to continue to breathe life into it and to keep it going and be current, and I think that's an awesome example.
And for your listeners, I don't want to single out James Quincy because there's a lot of good executives that I interact with. Okay. But because we're on the topic, this is a person that is very sharp, very smart, but very aware, right? And humble. And I think that helps his ability to communicate a very straightforward message. Hey, listen, we're going to innovate and we're going to fail, right? But if we don't try, then we'll never know, right? Versus, trying to make excuses for a product that didn't do well, right? Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of great examples out there that people can really latch onto.
Yeah, and Ed's sort of summing this up a little bit too, which is courageous versus just being, conservative, conservationist, right? And it's always a safe play to not, do something more innovative, something a bit more risk taking. But to your earlier point around terminal value, that could come at a really high price.
Yeah, and I'll even give you another example, right? Everything has to be about situational awareness, okay? If you don't understand what your organization is feeling or going through, it's hard for you to really connect with them. And I'll give you a great example. David Taylor, who recently retired as the CEO of P&G. I mean, I never thought I would place such a high value on Southern charm, right? Here you had a guy who obviously had a very long career at P&G at a time where P&G was struggling, okay? And some would argue, how would this guy know how to do things differently? But what P&G really needed is to heal its culture, to feel more comfortable of taking risk. And he was able to accomplish that because he understood what the organization needed, right? Now, obviously, there were other people that were part of that, but I just want to point the CEO out because I feel like he set the tone for the organization to heal, and now P&G is performing incredibly well in the marketplace. Well, so that's another great example.
Yeah, no, David's awesome. And as you say, they're killing it. And like everybody else, he wasn't expecting a pandemic to walk into, right? Correct. And, and somehow managed to navigate that amazingly well. Kind of in the kind of time remaining, are there any other kind of soft skills, attributes, behaviors, that we haven't talked about that you think would be important?
Yeah, Bob, I think this whole notion of awareness and emotional intelligence and really understanding kind of how you can create the most amount of value versus being a hamster on a wheel, right?
Yeah.
It requires somewhat of an out-of-body experience, right? And what I mean by that, and I make this comment to a lot of people that are looking for career advice. Step outside of yourself for a second, okay? Take a pause, because we get caught in the grind day to day. Step out of the grind. Find a way to do that, whether it's meditation or yoga or go hiking, and really understand what you're trying to do. What is your purpose? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to elevate yourself within the organization? Okay, if that's the case, well, who do you need to make sure you interact with? How can you get that visibility? Once you have that visibility, what do you do, right? And I don't think we as people do this enough. I have out-of-body experiences literally daily because everything is changing so quickly. I need to step away. What is my purpose? What am I actually trying to accomplish? Okay, I want to be a thought leader. Okay, if that means I want to be a thought leader, then I need to start thinking about the key topics and having a differentiated view on those topics while at the same time trying to be right. So that requires me to look at different sources and talk to different people, right? So let's get off the hamster wheel every now and then and have a little bit of reflection on what you're actually trying to accomplish, because I think that's going to make you much more productive and efficient.
Well, and that's such a great kind of, I think, summation point to end on, which is, taking a little bit of time to reflect. So it's a bit about getting the strategy right. I mean, honestly, if we're talking about career, that's kind of getting your career strategy right. And then now I can go execute because I'm not just busy doing. It's actually intentional action that I'm taking. Right. And it allows me to say yes to some things and no to other things because I actually know where I'm headed, which is the nature of making strategic choices.
Correct.
Right. So, Nik, off the chart, great, as I knew that it would be. You're a phenomenal friend, world-class analyst, and judging from the interaction that I'm seeing in the comment section here, you blew people away. So I just want to say thank you very much, and hope you have a wonderful, wonderful 2022.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me. Thanks for everyone for dialing in. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we made it through.
Awesome. Okay, brother. Talk to you soon. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. Bye.
Okay, cheers.